very good evening to everybody who's watching. I hope you're all healthy and safe. So, as you know, I'm going to speak about the Aryan Invasion Theory, which these days is also known as the Indo-Aryan Migration Theory. For the purpose of this talk, and for the sake of simplicity and brevity, I am simply going to refer to it as the Aryan Invasion Theory. So, the Aryan Invasion Theory concerns the question of the origin of us, the people of India, and the question of the origin of India's civilization, of India's cultural and religious traditions, and of the origin of the Sanskrit language, which has been the glue that has historically bound India's civilization together. This is a highly controversial question, as we shall see. It has two opposing sides, two opposing narratives. One side claims that India's culture, religion, civilization, and the Sanskrit language are foreign in origin. The other side asserts that India's culture, religion, civilization, and Sanskrit are indigenous. They are native to India. Now, one of these narratives is wrong because both of these views cannot be correct at the same time. Now, one of the things that I hate about India's education system in general and about India's history textbooks in particular is that they tend to dump information upon you without giving any context. You're expected to consume that information, memorize it, and then disgorge it during your annual examinations. Maybe the people who write these textbooks think that you're too stupid to understand historical context. Or maybe they don't want you to understand the cause and effect sequence that connects events that happened hundreds or even thousands of years ago to our present day circumstances. So I need you to understand this. And therefore, so that you understand this issue of the Aryan invasion theory properly, allow me to take you back in time to its actual origin. And its actual origin is several centuries before Vasco da Gama arrived in India in 1498. So before the Islamic invasions of India began, India had its own indigenous education system that had developed and evolved over a very long period of time. You may have heard about the great universities of Nalanda, Takshashila, Vikramshila, Vallabhi, Shardapit, Pushpagiri, Somapur, etc. So these are just the tip of the iceberg. There were tens, maybe hundreds more such great universities, and we are finding new archaeological sites all the time. However, the Indian education system was actually built around temples. There were tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of temples all across India. We can still see the ruins all over India today. So every city, every town, every village had a temple. And in fact, there's a Tamil saying that you should never reside in a village where there is no temple. So temples were the backbone of the Indian education system. The village and town temple was where you received your basic education. Every child received a basic education. Everyone learned Sanskrit. Everyone learned arithmetic and the basics of history and culture. For most students, that basic education was enough. Some students, though, would go on to study at a higher, more prominent temple. And there were numerous great temples throughout India. And these were more than religious institutions. They were institutes of higher learning. You would study the Vedas and the Upanishads and other such texts over there. And you would also study advanced subjects such as philosophy, logic, linguistics, mathematics, calculus, trigonometry, astronomy, medicine, and many other subjects. And then you had the great universities, which admitted the brightest and most worthy students. And that's where you would obtain the highest education available anywhere in the world. Now, when the Islamic invasions happened, India's great universities and temples were destroyed one by one. Every single one of them is in ruins today, as we know. Many of the smaller temples were also destroyed. Now, we know that India's universities were renowned for their immense libraries. These libraries were all burned. The library at Nalanda is known to have burned for over 3 months. So you can imagine how much knowledge we lost. Millions of books, tens of millions of books. The detailed records of thousands of years of our history. And this is how we became a people without a written history. Now, this is a very important point because there is a very commonly held view, even among highly educated Indian people, that the people of ancient India did not possess a sense of history, that they did not bother to record their history in the written form. This is absolutely untrue. Ancient Indians did record our ancient history. All those records were destroyed and burned during the Islamic invasions and the destruction of our universities. So, as a result, the only history that our ancestors from that time were left with had to be transmitted orally by word of mouth from generation to generation. And when the British occupied India, they declared these oral histories to be myths. And they proceeded to manufacture their own version of India's history. This British colonial version of India's history is the history of India that we are taught even today. And that is how and why the British were able to control the narrative of our history, because we lost the written records of our history during the Islamic invasions. Right, so as Europeans began visiting India in the 16th century, they began to notice similarities between the languages of India, those of Persia, and those of Europe. There are striking similarities in vocabulary and grammar that are too frequent and too consistent to be coincidental. So the term Indo-European languages first appeared in the early 19th century to denote this large family of languages that share many common features. And it was proposed that these Indo-European languages are descended from a single ancestral language, and that the speakers of the different Indo-European languages are all descended from a common ancestral population, a single ethnic group that lived in an ancient homeland in the distant past. Now, in the 1850s, the German philologist, I believe, Max Müller, introduced the notion of two Aryan races, a Western Aryan race and an Eastern Aryan race. He proposed that the ancestral homeland of these two branches of Aryans was somewhere in southern Russia. And he said that the Western Aryan race moved from its homeland into Europe, and that the Eastern Aryan race moved into Persia and India. Max Müller ascribed greater prominence and value to the Western branch of this hypothetical Aryan race. He hypothesized that the Eastern branch of the Aryan race was more powerful than the indigenous Indian natives, who were backward and easy to conquer. So this is the beginning, the genesis of the Aryan invasion theory. Then in the late 19th century, the British missionary Robert Caldwell divided the Indian people into two categories, Aryans and Dravidians, based on perceived differences in skin color and language. He declared that the people of South India are a separate race, Dravidians, and they are descended from the original natives of India. Now, in the 1920s, the great ancient cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were discovered and excavated by the British. This was in Sindh. They called this the Indus Valley Civilization. And in light of this new discovery, the Aryan invasion theory was modified to say that the Indus Valley Civilization was a Dravidian civilization, which was destroyed by the Aryans. So, what exactly is the Aryan invasion theory? The Aryan invasion theory is a narrative that claims to answer the question of the origin of India's civilization and languages. It's the foundation upon which the whole of Indian history has been written. And its central thesis has four main components. Firstly, that India's original inhabitants were dark-skinned Dravidians who built a vast, peaceful, and highly developed urban civilization in Western India and present-day Pakistan, the so-called Harappan or Indus Valley civilization. Second, that India was invaded and conquered from the west by a nomadic people called the Indo-Aryans around 1500 BCE. These Indo-Aryans were of European origin, they were white-skinned, and they spoke Vedic Sanskrit. They destroyed the indigenous Dravidian civilization, they subjugated the natives and forced them to migrate to India's south. Thirdly, the Indo-Aryans then composed the Vedas by around 1200 BCE, and they imposed Hinduism and the caste system upon the helpless Dravidians and various other indigenous peoples of India. And the last claim that this theory makes is that the ancestral homeland of the Indo-European languages and people is in southern Russia, north of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So this is the Aryan invasion theory. This is what it looked like in the first half of the 20th century. So in simple language, this theory implies that Aryans and Dravidians are separate peoples, separate races. They have nothing in common. It implies that the Aryans were the oppressors and the Dravidians were the victims. It implies that the people of northern India are Aryans, they are descended from the invading Aryans. And it implies that these people of southern India are Dravidians and that they are the true legitimate natives of India. This theory implies that Hinduism is a religion of invaders, of oppressors. It is an invasive, oppressive force. It also says that Sanskrit is the language of invaders and oppressors. And it also implies that Hinduism and Sanskrit are foreign to India. They were imposed upon the native Dravidians by force against their will. This is what the Aryan invasion theory says and implies. Now, in the 20th century, archaeologists looked everywhere in India for evidence of an Aryan invasion. They looked for this for decades, and they have found no such evidence. Because you see that invasions are violent affairs. When you invade a country, the locals will resist. There will be battles, there will be warfare and destruction. People will die. Cities and towns and villages will be destroyed. And this sort of activity leaves behind ample evidence in the archaeological record. You find evidence of soot and ash and fire. You find evidence of destroyed cities and towns and villages. You find evidence of battles and massacres and weapons and dead bodies. But there is no such evidence. There is not a single hint of any kind of foreign invasion in India's ancient archaeological record. And they have searched for it for well over a century, and they are still looking. So, as a result of this lack of evidence, in the late 20th century, historians were forced to amend the theory to say that there was an Aryan migration instead of an invasion. And they renamed the Aryan invasion theory to the Indo-Aryan migration theory. But there's absolutely no evidence of a migration either. Because migrations also leave behind distinctive archaeological evidence and clues, and those are all missing. And then in the first decade of the 21st century, the science of genetics began to offer new clues. It was discovered that there is no significant genetic difference between the people of North India and South India, East India and West India. The people of India are all genetically alike. We all have shared ancestry that goes back many thousands of years. So historians have been forced to modify the theory again. They now claim that there were multiple waves of very small Aryan migrations into India, and that the migrants somehow magically succeeded in imposing their religion, culture, and language on the indigenous Dravidians, all without resorting to any form of violence. So here's the thing. Every time this theory has been proved false, the eminent historians and academicians who control the narrative of India's history have moved quickly and modified the theory and created a new version, a new iteration of the theory. There have been several such iterations of this theory since the 1850s, and all of these iterations have one thing in common: the claim that Hinduism and Sanskrit are foreign to India. This is the core premise of the Aryan invasion or migration theory, that Hinduism and Sanskrit are foreign to India. I will return to this point again. Now, is there an alternative to the Aryan invasion theory? Is there a theory that provides a different answer to the question of the origin of India's people, its culture, its religion, its languages, its civilization? And as it turns out, there is. The alternative theory is called the indigenous Aryans theory, or the out of India theory. And this theory says three things. First, that the Indo-Aryan people and their languages originated in the Indian subcontinent. Second, that the Harappan civilization was the Vedic civilization itself. It was not a Dravidian civilization as claimed in the Aryan invasion theory. And thirdly, that the ancestral homeland of all the Indo-European languages and people is the Indian subcontinent, not southern Russia. Right, so now let's look at some evidence. Let's first look at archaeological evidence to get a handle on how old India's civilization is. So the oldest known archaeological site in India is called Bhirrana, which is in Haryana. Bhirrana is a Harappan site, and radiocarbon dating has shown that it is at least 9,500 years old. And there are thousands of other Harappan archaeological sites that have never been excavated. Many of them could even be older than Bhirrana. But from the evidence that we have so far, we can conclude that India's civilization is at least 9,500 years old, based on this archaeological evidence. Now, like I said earlier, there is no evidence in the archaeological record of warfare or invasion or even a migration. Instead, we find extensive archaeological evidence that many of the traditions and customs prevalent in the Harappan civilization continue to exist even today in modern India. So archaeologists have found large numbers of swastika seals. They have found large numbers of Pashupati seals, of Shivlingas, of statuettes of people in various yoga poses. They have found statuettes of people folding their hands in the Namaste greeting. They have found female statuettes with red pigment in the parting of their hair. And they have found statuettes of women wearing bangles, just like they do today. In fact, John Marshall, the archaeologist who excavated Harappa, said that taken as a whole, the Indus Valley people's religion is so characteristically Indian that one can hardly distinguish it from present-day Hinduism. So it's clear that there is an unbroken cultural continuity between us and the people of the ancient Harappan civilization. And it's also clear that this cultural continuity goes back to the very beginning of that civilization, around 9,000 or 9,500 years ago, and possibly even before that. So this falsifies the Aryan invasion theory's claims that Hinduism is a foreign religion that entered India after 1500 BCE. And it falsifies the claim that India's culture changed around 1500 BCE because of the Aryan invasion. Archaeology shows clear, unambiguous, and extensive evidence of cultural continuity in India for at least 9,000 years. Now let's look at evidence from the Rig Veda, which is the oldest recorded text, not only in India, but in fact in the entire Indo-European world. So the Aryan Invasion Theory claims that the Rig Veda was composed by the Aryan invaders right after they conquered India, somewhere around 1500 BCE or up to 1200 BCE. So the memory of the conquest of India was still very fresh in their minds. However, if we examine the text of the Rig Veda, we find that it does not contain even the faintest hint of any memory of any such invasion. There's no reference to any area outside the Indian subcontinent, and there is no reference to any foreign ancestral land. The geographic horizon of the Rig Veda is essentially the Sapta-Sindhu region, from western Uttar Pradesh and Haryana in the east to southern Afghanistan in the north, and the present-day border with Iran to the west. So in the Rig Veda, there's no reference to arriving into the Indian subcontinent from abroad and conquering indigenous Dravidian people. There's no reference to conquering and destroying a great urban civilization. And on the contrary, the hints of the Rig Veda show that the composers considered themselves native to the Vedic area, to which they show great sentimental attachment. The composers of the Rig Veda were intimately familiar with not only rivers, places, plants, and animals of the Sapta-Sindhu region, but also with those of eastern India. And on the other hand, there are no references to foreign rivers or places or plants or animals. Therefore, from the textual evidence of the Rig Veda, it's very clear that its composers were native to India. They were not foreign invaders. Now, let's look at linguistic evidence from outside the Indian subcontinent to try and get an idea of the approximate time period of the Rig Veda. So the Mitanni kingdom ruled in the region of present-day Syria and Iraq between 1500 BCE and 1300 BCE. Now, this kingdom was special because it had an Indo-Aryan aristocracy. In other words, their kings were of Indo-Aryan origin and they spoke Sanskrit. So these people, the Mitanni, they left behind Sanskrit inscriptions and records that are dated to around 1500 BCE. And when the names and words and vocabulary of the Mitanni Sanskrit records are compared with the Rig Veda, it is found that these elements are completely absent from the older books of the Rig Veda, but these elements are found in abundance in the new books of the Rig Veda and in post-Rig Vedic texts and later literature. So this indicates that the elements of the culture common to the Rig Veda and the Mitanni belong to the period of composition of the new books of the Rig Veda. Now, it's well known based on linguistic evidence that the Indo-Aryan ancestors of the Mitanni arrived in Syria sometime between 2500 BCE and 2000 BCE. Therefore, it's clear that the new books of the Rig Veda must date back to before 2500 BCE at the very least. And the old books of the Rig Veda will therefore go much further back in time to at least 3000 BCE or even much earlier. So we can therefore conclude with confidence that the Rig Veda dates back to 3000 BCE at the very least, and it is possibly much older than that. So this completely destroys the Aryan Invasion Theory's claim that the Rig Veda was composed after 1500 BCE. Now, let's try and find the date of the Rig Veda by looking for a lost river. The river Saraswati is extensively mentioned in the Rig Veda. It is referred to as the greatest of rivers, as glorious, as loudly roaring, and as the mother of floods. This clearly refers to a river that was larger and mightier than all the other rivers of the Sapta Sindhu region. And there's obviously no such river today. But there does exist a massive dry riverbed in the very region mentioned in the Rig Veda. This dry riverbed stretches from the Himalayas in the north to the Sea of Saurashtra and Kutch to the south. And in northern India, there is still a seasonal intermittent river called the Ghaggar-Hakra that flows for a certain distance in this riverbed. And the people who live in these regions have always known that a great river once flowed there, and they consistently identify it with the Vedic Saraswati. And actually, in the 1800s, British historians and explorers also readily accepted the identification of this dry riverbed with the Vedic river Saraswati. Now, today it's known that there are over 1,500 unexplored archaeological sites of the so-called Harappan civilization along the banks of the Saraswati. And Bhirrana, which I referred to just now, is one of them. There are more sites along the Saraswati than along any other river in the civilization's geography. Now, a scientific paper published in 2016 has found that the Saraswati was once a mighty river along which in the Indian civilization's earliest settlements were founded. It found that the Indian monsoon started declining after 5000 BCE. So this gradually weakened the Saraswati, which eventually dried out to a large extent around 1500 BCE. So the Harappan civilization thus gradually de-urbanized due to declining monsoons, due to climate change. It did not collapse abruptly. And smaller settlements of this civilization continued. And they eventually dispersed towards the Himalayan foothills, towards the Ganga-Yamuna plain, towards Gujarat and Rajasthan. Now, the Saraswati that is mentioned in the Rig Veda is clearly a mighty river in its prime. It is not a river that is dying. It is not a river in decline. This clearly proves that the Rig Veda was composed closer to 5000 BCE, when the Saraswati was last in its prime, and not after 1500 BCE, as claimed by the Aryan Invasion Theory. So all this evidence taken together tells us that the Rig Veda was composed before 3000 BCE, and it was closer to 5000 BCE, or possibly even before that. It was in no way composed any time after 3000 BCE. So this evidence, once again, completely debunks the Aryan Invasion Theory's claim that the Rig Veda was composed after 1500 BCE. Let's now look at literary evidence of Indo-Aryan expansion to the west of India. So ancient Indian literature talks about several instances of Indo-Aryan clans migrating out of India to the west. The Druhyu clan is recorded as having migrated towards the north into Central Asia and further westwards, where they actually founded various kingdoms. And the Anu clan is recorded as having fled towards the west after being defeated in a monumental battle, the Battle of the 10 Kings. So this clan migrated into present-day Afghanistan and later further westwards. And then we have evidence from a Vedic text called the Baudhayana Shrauta Sutra. So this Vedic text records the westward migration of a king called Amavasu. It states that Amavasu migrated westward. His people are the Gandhari, the Parshu, and the Aratta. So this refers to a Vedic king called Amavasu, whose people are the Gandhari, and we know that Gandhar is Afghanistan. So we can readily identify the Gandhari people with people living in Afghanistan. His people are also the Parshu, which is clearly a reference to the Persians. And his people are also the Aratta people, who could possibly be Armenians. Now, we know very well that Gandhara, or Afghanistan, was historically part of the Indian civilization until the time of the Islamic invasions. And the name Persia comes from the Parshu clan of Rigvedic Aryans. Now, there's an interesting anecdote over here. The German Indologist Michael Witzel and the Marxist historian Romila Thapar have in the past mistranslated this passage of the Baudhayana Shrauta Sutra, and they misinterpreted it to mean that Amavasu migrated eastward, not westward. And this caused a heated controversy. But this claim was completely debunked and it no longer stands. They have stopped making this claim. So it's clear that we have significant literary evidence of migrations and expansions of ancient Indians towards the west of India. And as we have already seen, the Mitanni kingdom offers undisputable archaeological evidence of the migration of Sanskrit-speaking Indo-Aryans all the way into Syria and eastern Turkey, Anatolia. Let us now examine a fascinating piece of mythological evidence of the westward expansion of Indo-Aryan people. And this is also linguistic in origin. So the Rig Veda refers to a goddess called Danu. She was a river goddess, and she was the mother or the matriarch of the Danava clan of Indo-Aryans. And as the story goes, the Danavas revolted against the Devas, and they were eventually defeated and banished. In other words, they were forced into exile out of India. And that's where the story ends in Indian literature. But it turns out that that was far from the end of their story. Now consider this. The word Danu means fluid and drop in Rig Vedic Sanskrit. The old Iranian word for river is Danu, and the Scythian and Sarmatian words for river are also Danu. Now consider this. Linguistically, the names of the European rivers, Danube, Dnieper, Dniester, Don, Donets, Dunayik, Dvina, Dogava, and Disna are all derived from the Rig Vedic Sanskrit root word Danu. These rivers flow across Eastern and Central Europe, and these rivers, which evidently are all named after the Rig Vedic goddess, river goddess Danu, these rivers seem to trace the gradual westward migration through Europe of the Danava clan of Rig Vedic Indo-Aryans. So then the question arises, where did the Danavas eventually end up? Now, according to Irish and Celtic mythology, the Irish and Celtic people are descended from a mother goddess, a river goddess called Danu. The ancient mythological people of Ireland are called the peoples of the goddess Danu. So here we have mythological evidence and linguistic evidence that connects India with Ireland, which is almost the westernmost part of Europe. And this is backed up with hard linguistic evidence from the names of a large number of European rivers. So there has to be more to this story than just mythology. This must represent a very real ancient migration. So what we have seen thus far is that there's a huge amount of archaeological, literary, and linguistic evidence that falsifies the Aryan invasion theory and supports the out of India theory. And because of this, the proponents of the Aryan invasion theory have been forced to abandon their arguments from archaeology and linguistics altogether. They are now trying to base their theory on genetic evidence only. So they now claim that genetic evidence is the only factor that will decide whether Hinduism and Sanskrit came from outside India or not. Now think about this. Let's say that an Indian person converts to Christianity. Will their DNA also convert to Christianity? And let's say that I learn to speak a foreign language. Let's say I learn to speak French. Will my DNA also become French? No, it will not. It will remain the same. It will remain Indian. It's as simple as that. So this is an absurd, nonsensical argument because DNA does not carry religion or language. And yet, this is the new desperate approach of the proponents of the Aryan invasion theory. So anyhow, let's take a look at what genetic evidence tells us. So the science of genetics has completely revolutionized the study of ancient history, and it has given researchers an unprecedented window into humanity's ancient past. Scientists have been investigating India's genetic history for the past decade or decade and a half, and they have made very interesting discoveries. So this research paper found that there is no significant outside genetic influence in India for the past 10 to 15,000 years. And this research paper found that there was no significant patrilineal gene flow from East Europe into India, at least for the past 5 to 7,000 years. And this research paper rejects the possibility of an Aryan invasion or migration, and it concludes that Indian populations are genetically unique and they harbor the second highest genetic diversity after Africa. And this is just the beginning of the revelations. So now let's understand what a haplogroup is. In genetic terminology, a haplogroup is a group of individuals who share a common ancestor with a particular genetic mutation. So a haplogroup is essentially a bloodline. It's a genetic lineage. In Sanskrit, we call it a vansh. So a haplogroup pertains to a single line of descent that typically dates back several thousand years. So in other words, a haplogroup is a large extended family or clan, all of whose members have a shared ancestry. There are two types of haplogroups: Y chromosome or patrilineal haplogroups, and mitochondrial DNA or matrilineal haplogroups. And haplogroups are identified by letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, etc. And subgroups are denoted by letters and numbers like A1A, A1B, 1B, that sort of thing. Now, here's the interesting thing. The patrilineal or Y chromosomal haplogroup R1A1A, which is also known as RM17, happens to be the world's most successful extended family. Its members number in the high hundreds of millions. They may possibly even be over 1 billion in number. And this haplogroup is widespread across Eurasia, with high concentrations in Russia, in Poland, in Ukraine, as well as in the Indian subcontinent and in the Tuva region of Asiatic Russia. So this haplogroup, R1A1A, appears to be closely associated with the spread of Indo-European languages across Eurasia. It records an uninterrupted lineage of males from father to son, all of whom have descended from one single common male ancestor who lived several thousand years ago. And the proponents of the Aryan invasion theory identify this haplogroup R1A1A as the haplogroup that represents the Indo-Aryan people in India, and they call it incorrectly the Aryan gene. Now, here's the even more interesting part. This research paper demonstrates that the R1A1 haplogroup originated in India, and it is at least 18,000 years old. And this paper confirms the result of that paper, and it demonstrates that the oldest examples of the haplogroup R1A are found in the Indian subcontinent, and they are approximately 15,450 years old. And a new study, which is currently in the final stages, this new study is by Indian scientists. It will be published very soon. It is going to confirm the conclusions of these papers, and it's going to prove that the R1A haplogroup did indeed originate in India. So these are momentous discoveries. They tell us that the hundreds of millions of members, possibly over 1 billion members of the R1A family living across the world today, which is a very large fraction of humanity, they are all descended from one single male ancestor who lived in India at least 15,450 years ago. This discovery demonstrates that there was indeed an invasion, but it was not into India, it was out of India. And this invasion changed the ancient world. It shaped the course of human history. So the only question that remains right now is whether R1A1A represents only Indo-Aryan people or whether it represents all Indians, including the so-called Dravidian people. And the answer to that is available. This Nature report, which cites 3 separate genetic studies, demonstrates that most Indians are genetically alike. So this debunks the hypothesis of the Aryan-Dravidian dichotomy. And other studies have also demonstrated that people in North India are no different from those in the South, and that all Indians share the same common genetic lineage. And this haplogroup, the R1A1A haplogroup, is found in high frequencies in North Indians as well as in South Indians. It is found in tribal communities. It is found in so-called low castes as well as so-called high castes. It is found in all Indians from east to west, from north to south. So this evidence proves that the artificial concepts of an Aryan-Dravidian divide and a high caste, low caste divide are myths. They have no basis in fact. Right, so what does all this evidence indicate? We have looked at archaeological evidence. We have looked at textual evidence from the Rig Veda. We have examined linguistic evidence from Mitanni records. We have looked at hydrological, geological, and climatic evidence from the Saraswati. We have looked at literary evidence from ancient Indian texts. We have looked at mythological evidence, and we have examined linguistic evidence from the names of European rivers. We have also gone through evidence from the science of genetics, not just within India, but across the whole of Eurasia. So it is clear now that there is layer upon layer upon layer of multidisciplinary evidence that forms a consistent, repeated, and predictable pattern that totally debunks the Aryan invasion theory and supports the out of India theory. And these layers of evidence taken together as a whole prove that, firstly, that the Indo-Aryan people and languages originated in the Indian subcontinent itself. Secondly, that the Vedic civilization and the Saraswati civilization, which is also known as the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization, are one and the same. It proves that the Rig Veda was composed closer to 5000 BCE, when the river Saraswati was last in its prime, than to 1500 BCE, as is claimed by the Aryan invasion theory. So this makes the Rig Veda the world's oldest known literature. The evidence shows that rather than being a religion of invaders, Hinduism is indigenous to India and has its origins in the very beginning of the Saraswati civilization. It also shows that Sanskrit is indigenous to India. The evidence demonstrates that North Indians and South Indians, East Indians and West Indians all are genetically and culturally alike. The Aryan-Dravidian divide is a myth. It has no basis in fact. And the high caste, low caste divide also has no basis in fact. The evidence shows that India's civilization is a continuous, unbroken tradition that dates back to the very beginning of the Saraswati civilization, which is at least 9,500 years before today. This makes India not only the world's oldest civilization, older than Egypt and Mesopotamia, but it also makes India the world's oldest continuously existing civilization. Therefore, India should be called the true cradle of civilization. And the evidence also demonstrates that Indo-Aryans carrying R1A1A lineages expanded westwards thousands of years ago, conquering and populating territories throughout Europe. They were the most successful conquerors in human history. The R1A1A bloodline is the world's largest and most successful extended family. So in short, all this evidence taken together comprehensively debunks the Aryan invasion myth and its various newer refinements which seek to replace an invasion with various kinds of migrations. So let's go back to what I spoke about earlier. Every time this theory has been proved false, the historians and academics who control the narrative of India's history have quickly gone ahead and modified the theory, and they have created a new version of the theory each time. There have been several such versions of this theory since the 19th century, and all of these versions have one thing in common: the claim that Hinduism and Sanskrit are foreign to India. That, like we discussed, is the core premise of the Aryan invasion or migration theory. And what is the intent of this theory? The intent is to denigrate, demonize, and weaken Hinduism. It is to portray India's indigenous culture, religion, and civilization as being backward and evil and oppressive. And therefore, they want to justify the Islamic invasions of India. They want to justify the European Christian colonization of India. And they seek to justify ongoing efforts to culturally and religiously colonize India all over again. So the logic is that your religion and culture is foreign to India. It is backward, regressive, evil, oppressive, misogynistic, casteist, and patriarchal. And since your religion is foreign to India, other foreign religions also have the right to invade and colonize India. And the unspoken assertion is that you Indians do not have an exclusive right to your land, to your country, or to your people. You have no sovereignty over your ancestral lands. So that is the real intent and purpose of the Aryan invasion theory, to catalyze the recolonization of India. Now, despite all of this evidence that destroys the Aryan invasion theory, this theory is still taught as a fact in India's history textbooks at the school, college, and university levels. It is still portrayed as factual and correct by India's mainstream media. You even have business journalists writing books about this as if they were experts. And not only that, the entire Western academic ecosystem is invested in promoting this false Eurocentric narrative. And there are various powerful and extremely wealthy foreign religious groups, you can guess who they are, who are also invested in promoting this false narrative. So what we find is that there is a vast, interconnected, and very well-funded global nexus that is dedicated to perpetuating the Aryan invasion myth using the power of money and propaganda. Now, the Aryan invasion theory portrays Hindu culture as hegemonic and racist and intolerant and evil. And this theory is taught to every single Indian child studying in school, college, and higher. This creates artificial fault lines in India's society along lines such as race and caste and religion and even geography. It imposes a feeling of guilt on Hindus and on people from northern and western India, and on people who speak Indo-Aryan languages, and on people who belong to certain castes. It creates deep resentment among people who identify themselves as Dravidian or Dalit. And this resentment manifests itself in various forms such as separatism, anti-nationalism, and the rejection of Hinduism and Indian culture. So this makes the Aryan invasion theory a very powerful political tool which perfectly serves the leftist, secular, and liberal political narrative. It also serves the agendas of Dravidian nationalists and Dalit supremacists and missionaries and separatists and various assorted breaking India forces, internal as well as external. This theory has been used to divide India for a very long time into antagonistic categories such as North Indians and South Indians, Aryans and Dravidians, The fair-skinned people and the dark-skinned people, high castes and Dalits, the privileged and the underprivileged, the oppressors and the oppressed. Now here's the thing. The left secular liberal ecosystem derives much of its strength and power from its decades-old stranglehold on Indian academia, especially in the humanities. What we find is that leftist academics control most of India's humanities departments. Leftist historians and academics monopolize academic discourse in India, and they marginalize dissenting voices. And that is how the leftist ecosystem has ensured that every school and college and university textbook teaches the Aryan Invasion Theory. Now, you and me, we all know that India's education system discourages students from asking questions and thinking on their own. You dare not question your teacher, right? This conditioning makes Indian students accept the leftist narrative without question. And as a result of this, many generations of Indians have grown up and spent their entire lives hating their ancestral culture and heritage, or at least feeling ashamed of it. So this Aryan Invasion Theory, it gives the leftist professors and academics the ideal rationale for denigrating Indian culture, for exhorting low caste or lower caste students to reject Hinduism. It gives them the perfect rationale for encouraging female students to reject Hinduism for being patriarchal and misogynistic. It gives them the opportunity to call into question India's right to exist as a nation, and it gives them the ideal rationale for supporting anti-national and separatist movements. And they do all of these things on academic and scholarly grounds. So this is how several generations of unquestioning, obedient, and impressionable students have been indoctrinated and recruited into the leftist movement. You will see highly intelligent students brainwashed into supporting Pakistan's stand on Kashmir and China's stand on Tibet and Arunachal Pradesh. And this theory also gives India's liberals and secularists the perfect justification for promoting hatred and intolerance towards India's culture, while at the same time claiming to be liberal and progressive. So as we can see, the Aryan Invasion Theory is the academic premise behind all of the methods that are used to attack India's culture and to undermine India's integrity. It is their trump card. If you take it away, they have nothing else left. And that is why they are desperate for this theory to remain the dominant narrative in India. And that is the reason why India's leftist historians and academics and professors have for decades dismissed any attempt to question the Aryan Invasion Theory as Hindutva. And this is why they oppose any suggestion to modernize India's history textbooks as fascism and saffronization. So what's the way forward? What does India need to do going forward? The answer is pretty simple, actually. Firstly, India needs to decolonize and reform and modernize its education system so that our children can finally learn the truth about their history. And to do that, we need to put an end to the leftist stranglehold on the education system. We need to modernize our history textbooks and decontaminate them of the left liberal secular ideology and propaganda. Because textbooks should not have any kind of ideology or propaganda. Education should be based only on hard facts and scientific evidence. It should not be allowed to be used as a political tool. Secondly, what India needs to do is it needs to assume full ownership and leadership of its scientific and historical research. It needs to stop depending on other countries. India needs to create its own research institutes and multidisciplinary research groups. We need to empower these groups and these researchers. We need to fund them adequately, and we need to provide them with the equipment and the facilities and the infrastructure needed to do world-class research. And thirdly, what I would say is that India needs to do detailed archaeological and scientific studies of two ancient archaeological sites, Dwarka and Ram Setu. We need to precisely date these sites as precisely as is possible, and we need to document and analyze and study and preserve the archaeological evidence that we find there. Because Dwarka is the key to discovering when the Mahabharata war happened, and Ramasetu is the key to discovering when the events of the Ramayana took place. Because there's no doubt in my mind that these were real historical events. And these two ancient archaeological sites represent an incredible opportunity for us as a civilization to rediscover our heritage and to reconnect with it. So, to conclude, there now exists an enormous amount of scientific evidence that proves that the Aryan Invasion theory is a myth. This theory is a myth, it is fiction, it belongs in the big league of unscientific theories, such as the myth of Noah's Ark and flat earth theory. So all this evidence that we have, it shows that India is much more than a secular socialist republic or a nation state. India is the world's oldest civilization. India wasn't born in 1947. Our civilization is at least 9,500 years old and probably much older. So the rediscovery of India's history has only just begun. It's going to be a long road ahead, but it's going to be very exciting. Thank you very much.
Abhijit, this is Rahul from Sangam Talks. There is a whole narrative around the mythologicalness or mythology of the Saraswati itself. They say that the river did not exist at all, or if it existed, it's possibly also the Amu Darya of Kabul. Do you want to make a comment on that?
Right. So this thing is called Frawley's paradox. It was Dr. David Frawley who first mentioned this. So what we have is that we have this vast ancient civilization, which is the so-called Harappan civilization. We have this vast ancient body of literature, the Vedas, the Puranas, and all these things. And then we have, so we have these two things, and India's researchers somehow are unwilling to join these two things together. They keep on insisting that the Vedas and the Puranas and all the ancient literature of India came from abroad, and that this vast civilization that we have in India's geography itself, it is a separate civilization from whoever created this literature. So this is a paradox that we find, and they go to any length to claim that there is no connection between the literature and the geography. But what we have today is that, so like you mentioned, they do mention that the Saraswati could be the Amu Darya or the Helmand River in Afghanistan, or it could be something else. It could be the Harahvati River in Iran, because there's a river named Harahvati in Iran. So they make all kinds of claims, but they are somehow unwilling to see this enormous riverbed that goes all the way from the Himalayas to the sea. And they just want to completely ignore that. So that doesn't make any sense. From the perspective of a researcher, you have to draw the most logical conclusion. You look at various kind of evidence, right? Various kinds of evidence. You look at multidisciplinary evidence, and based on all that evidence, if it all points in the same direction, then you have to make a logical conclusion. And that's why we have concluded that the dry riverbed that we have in this region, it is the ancient Vedic river Saraswati.
I listened to your talk. I have two questions regarding the AIT theory. Can I ask?
Please do.
Yeah. So the first question is regarding the claim that the Aryans come from the southern Russian. Those AIT claimers claim that the Aryans come from the southern Russian region. So is that they claimed it so because of the presence of or the history of Genghis Khan there, so that they can name the Aryans as the dacoits or the looters?
So the Aryans are so according to this Aryan invasion theory,
Yeah.
which claims that the homeland was in southern Russia. So according to this theory, the Aryans came into India sometime around 1500 BCE, which is 3,500 years before today. Now, if you look at the history of Genghis Khan, he lived sometime in the 12th century or the 13th century AD, which is just 700 or 800 years ago. So there is clearly there's a huge time gap between the Aryans and Mr. Genghis Khan. So I would say no, there is no connection between Genghis Khan and the Aryan invasion theory, because there's a huge temporal gap between these two.
Hello. Yeah, and the second question is regarding the Danu River. Yeah, so like if you search about the earth pronunciation in the Middle East, they used to say that dunya as the earth. And because there is the presence of Danu River, and as all the civilizations are near the Danu, always any civilization starts near the river. So they coined this name of civilization or the name of earth as dunya from the Danu. Is there can be any possibility like?
Well, I have not heard this claim before, so I'm not sure that what is the linkage between these two. Dunya sounds like either an Arabic or an Iranian word. So from whatever research I have done, there doesn't seem to be any connection between this word dunya and the Rigvedic goddess Danu. But there is clearly a connection between the Rigvedic goddess Danu and all these rivers that I mentioned in Europe, and also with the Irish goddess Danu. So that linkage definitely is there. But about dunya, I don't think so.
Thanks a lot, Abhijit ji, for this quite enlightening talk on this topic. I have a couple of questions here. So now we see there is mounting evidence, there is compelling evidence of the truth behind this Aryan invasion theory and what are the facts related to it. So, and we know what is the way forward, like you mentioned that India needs to invest a lot in the research and all indigenously. So my question is, since the damage is continuously being done in the education system of the children, so when do you see all this changing? A decade or even maybe beyond? Because you see the Indian judicial system and all, so things really get caught up. Like Ayodhya, you see the verdict of Ayodhya took so long to come out. So this is the first part of the question. And second question to it is, there have been claims that horses have not been native to India. What is the truth behind this?
Right. So when do I see the education system being reformed? I really don't know. I would like to see it today or tomorrow, but I don't know. See, the fact is that India's governance machinery and bureaucracy and every single institution that India has, including the education system, all of these things, all of these systems and institutions are deeply colonial in origin and in nature. Even today, we do everything the colonial way. Nothing has changed. So in 1947, we got our independence, but the system never changed. People were celebrating, thinking that all these oppressive ways of the bureaucracy and everything will go away, but that never happened. It's still there today. So it's a very uphill task. I hope that the present government would consider it very seriously, because it is something that is really causing immense damage to our people. So I hope it is done soon enough.
I have a comment there, Abhijit. The biggest damage, they say that luckily a lot of students, 95% or whatever, don't read what we are taught seriously, right? And so it works for us. However, I think there's very serious problems that happen when we are studying for IAS and UPSC and all of those exams, because it's full of filth. And these guys go on to become the top minds in the country.
That's the tragedy of our system. It's so unfortunate, really, because of the kind of things that they teach in the IAS, the kind of things that you have to study for the IAS exams.
I'd ask a question. What does the Rakhigarhi DNA evidence tell us?
So the Rakhigarhi DNA evidence tells us that the individual who was tested, whose DNA was extracted and analyzed, did not have any genetic component from the West, from Central Asia or from Europe or from South Russia. So that person was completely indigenous. That person was entirely Indian in origin. So that is in short, what the Rakhigarhi evidence says. But there are many questions around this because we know that in our culture we tend to cremate our dead, right? We don't bury our dead. And that tradition has been continuing for a very long time. And we also find evidence of cremations in Rakhigarhi itself. So there has been a very valid doubt being raised that perhaps the individuals that we find buried in Rakhigarhi are actually first generation immigrants. And therefore, it may not represent the actual genetic composition of the indigenous people of Rakhigarhi or India. So what needs to be done going forward is that we need lots of genetic samples. Only when we have 50 or 100 samples will we be able to actually form a good idea of what was the genetic constitution of the people of that time. So that's what needs to be done. But as of now, this is what it is in short.
Actually, my question is like in southern India, especially in Tamil Nadu, the people are strongly believe the invasion theory, this Aryan invasion theory, and the main reason behind it, they are compare Tamil with the Sanskrit on the ground level. Even though people are not aware about the history, even they don't want to be. So always they are comparing in that way. Like if Tamil is older than the Sanskrit, then why we need the other language? On that ground, they are saying Sanskrit or the Brahmins came from the Persia or the Iran, like that. And second thing, they are always claiming this Kumari Kandam. So how it's relevant, this Kumari Kandam to our this India or the Tamil Nadu?
So let me first answer the first part of the question. Yeah, you're right. Lots of people in Tamil Nadu today believe that they are against Hindi imposition or Saffordization and all those things, and they believe that Tamil is older than Sanskrit and therefore we should reject Sanskrit and all that. Now, to these people, I would like to ask a simple question: that the Chola dynasty, which was a Tamil dynasty, and it was the world's longest reigning dynasty. It was in power for more than 1500 years. These Cholas, they conquered the whole of Indonesia. They conquered Sri Lanka. They conquered Thailand, Myanmar. They conquered Southeast Asia, most of it, okay, all the way up to the Philippines. And what these Tamil Cholas did was that they propagated Sanskrit and Hinduism all over these lands. Right. So if the Cholas are Tamils, then why didn't they propagate Tamil, the Tamil language, to all these countries? Instead of that, why did they propagate Hinduism and Sanskrit? So the answer to that is very, very simple. Hinduism and Sanskrit is as much indigenous to Tamil Nadu as it is anywhere else in the country. That is the very clear answer from that itself, from this example itself. So today what's happening is that there is a lot of politicization. Politics is all about claiming victimhood. Right. So all these Dravidian parties, I don't want to name them, but they play this politics of victimhood, that we are the victims and the North Indians have been oppressing us. That's why you vote for us and we will free you, we will emancipate you, all that sort of thing. And that's why lots of people believe this particular narrative today. And also because of the education system, like I have gone into some depth. That is the answer to the first part of the question. And about Kumari Kandam, I would say that there is no evidence for it anywhere. In the geological record, in the geographic record, there is no evidence for it. So if there is no evidence for it, what do we say about it? There's nothing to talk about.
I have like a couple of comments and couple of questions. To start with, our colleague just said about Raj Vedam, sir. It's not just meters, it's like in kilometer, it's around 4,900 something meters. So, it's like a lot of distance between the land and the present sea level. But that is my first question. Sangam Talks arranges and has fantastic people like you coming in and giving us this knowledge and information. Why don't we have some sort of coordinated effort here? Because someone like me who follows and goes and listens to this talk, I can suggest, as in case of Raj Vedam sir's comment, or with regards to Saraswati River, I think Mr. Nilesh Oak had mentioned that there was a research done by someone from University of Aberdeen, which takes back Saraswati River to 22,000 BCE kind of dates. So if we have more of a coordinated effort, it will be easier for you guys and us as well to get something out of it going forward. So that can be a first question. The second is, you mentioned about in your presentation about your idea of going forward, and I feel those three items are more of like next generation thing, which will affect someone who is going to come out of education system in next 20 years. What should we do now, or what will you advise me now to go and share this thing with the present generation of our age, so that we contribute to your effort as well in enlightening our present lot about what you guys are giving us. So I think this is the two things I will like you to address, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So regarding the first question about why isn't there more coordination between various people who are doing various kinds of research in these topics? Well, I would say that the thing is that whatever people are doing today, it's mostly scientists, first of all. And what they are doing today, they are doing all this research in their free time. Everybody has a job, everybody has some work to do. And whenever they are free, they are taking some time out of their lives to do this research. Now, if the government were to fund these people, then they would be able to give up all their other work and put their entire focus on doing this work. And then they would be able to collaborate and coordinate. Right now, what's happening is that everybody has a certain small amount of time in which they can do these things. So everybody is in doing these things in their own free time and all that. So that is the real reason why there is no coordination, because of a lack of systematic funding. That's what's lacking in India. So all this research that you're finding in various places, it's being done by various groups on their own, with their own funding and all that. That is the real reason, because we don't have funding. And what was the second question? Sorry, I forgot that.
Okay, second thing was for the present generation, what's your advice for us to take this forward right now?
So what I would say is that try and learn, first of all, as much as you can. Read up whatever you can, learn, educate yourself. Everybody, see, we are all learning. Even I am learning. Everybody's learning all the time. So what we need to do is we need to keep reading. We need to keep educating ourselves. And whatever we learn, we can pass on to the people that we care about in whatever way we can. So if we read a good book, we can maybe share it with somebody we care about. If we watch a good video or a good talk, we can share it with our family or friends. That sort of thing we can do. At our level, this is what we can do, because we are not in a organization together. We are not coordinated in an official manner. So this is what we can do at our level.
Thank you so much for a wonderful session.
Thank you.
So my first question is like a very general one, like why all this is relevant to me? Like I'm enjoying my job and earning money and etc etc. So like this is like I face very regularly, and like when I try to engage with youngsters and even like of my age also. So this is just a general question. And the second one is like you said, like there was some claims made by Romila, and there was a rebuttal and all that stuff. So like what all kind of types of proofs, and like who has the authority over it to say okay, this is right or wrong, or like who are those any agency or any kind of that. So like how to in the end like draw a final conclusion, okay, this is right, this is wrong. So that is my second question.
So let me answer the second question first. What happens right now is that the people in authority, the people in power right now in the academic system, they are people who are very clearly biased towards the Aryan invasion theory. So if you do a piece of research that debunks a certain aspect of the theory and you try to publish it as an academic paper, most likely it's going to get rejected. So that's the kind of academic environment that researchers are facing right now. So who is the authority? The authorities are actually all biased, right? So what we can do to understand what is right and what is wrong is basically we have to look at scientific evidence. Scientific evidence is the only way forward, because science cannot have shades of gray. You cannot inject ideology into science. Of course, people have been doing that with genetics and all that. So that's where it gets really murky. So that's why I was suggesting that India needs to create its own institutions and institutes where the research can be done properly. That's not there right now. That's why India's researchers are struggling very, very badly. That's the problem.
First of all, sir, thank you very much for this enlightening talk. Sir, I had few questions, but since Sakshi question has been already asked, I want to ask that what is stopping the right-wing intelligentsia to take this fight on the judicial grounds? Since we claim to have so much scientific fact, this was my first question. Or in other words, we can say that do we have sufficient scientific data to debunk this in the legal field? And my second question was, since you mentioned Rajaraja Chola and his heritage, we had an advertisement by a watchmaker, Titan, in which he showed Tamil temples associated with Tamil identity, and there was a trend going on Twitter to somehow claim that no, this is a Brahminical trend. We do not support this kind of advertisement which is being associated with Tamilians. So what's your take on that?
Yes, so there is this trend right now that they want to rewrite or reconfigure their history, and they want to erase the so-called Brahminical or Hindu part of their history. So that is extremely unfortunate. It's like it's a form of Abrahamism that when you convert to a certain religion, you have to destroy all traces of your past. That's the kind of thing that's happening. So this is it's very unfortunate, and the way we can combat this is only through right education. So clearly we have a long way to go for that. So that's the thing, right? Because it's very widespread in Tamil Nadu right now, this sort of thing, this sort of mindset, because the entire system, the entire political system and the education system, they're all aligned in that direction. And even the media is a very strong driving factor of these things. So that is the reason why we see this phenomenon in such a widespread fashion.
There's a question coming to me on chat from Renuka Ghateji. Were all written evidences present only in universities which were destroyed? I mean, she's trying to ask whether manuscripts survived in households, and do we have access to that? Or perhaps an extension of the question is, the National Manuscripts Mission, have all that access do they have? Has all that been translated and interpreted and all?
So the answer to that is, I'm sure many manuscripts survived in various places, in households and other places. I have seen reports in the news of many ancient manuscripts gathering dust in various government lockers and storehouses and all that. So manuscripts did survive. Obviously, the vast bulk of the ancient literature was burned down, but other manuscripts did survive in India. We still find the occasional treasure coming out sometime from some place or the other. And the other thing is that many Indian texts were translated into the Chinese language, the Tibetan language, or Persian or Arabic, because they did value our knowledge. So one of the ways to recover our ancient knowledge which is lost is to go and look into these these countries and whatever ancient records they have of our country, because we find lots of that. So that is another way that we can recover some of our knowledge. So all of the knowledge wasn't burned down, all of it was not destroyed, but I would say the major part of it was, because temples, the temples in the great universities was where you stored all of that, So whatever has survived is probably copies of certain things, but unfortunately a lot of it is gone.
I have a question from Amalji. He's saying that, do the Vedas mention the south? So I'll add on to that. I believe that there is only references to Narmada and Dandakaranya or somewhere, and below that there are no references. Can you comment on that?
Yes, right. So the Vedas are very, very distinct geography. It is the region of the Sapta Sindhu region, which is from western UP and Haryana to the east, to the border of Iran in the west, to South Afghanistan in the north, to basically the Vindhya range, or probably Gujarat or northern Maharashtra in the south. So that is the boundary, that is the horizon of the Vedic geographical sphere. So there is no other mention of anything to the south of this region.
And an extension to that, so Banaras is, there is, as new evidence comes out, it perhaps feels like that Banaras and the Indus Valley perhaps coexisted or something like that. Can you comment on that? And also about the Kirudi excavations and the recent excavations in Kerala as well.
Right. So like I mentioned in the talk, there does seem to be a significant amount of awareness among the Rig Vedic people of the lands to the east. So they are aware of the place names of those lands. They are familiar with the geography, with the animals, the flora and the fauna. So there does seem to be awareness of the lands to the east of this geographical region, but not to the south. Now, as far as Kiladi goes, that is approximately 2,000 years old. So that is definitely in the time period after the Vedic age. It is sometime around the classical Sanskrit age of Panini. And I am sure that, see, what people think of is that Kiladi is a separate Tamil civilization and everything that you find is a separate civilization. I am sure it is not that way. Today, if you look at India, it is completely interconnected, right? We do have, if you go to Tamil Nadu, you will see signs in Tamil. If you go to Punjab, you'll see signs, you'll see street signs in Punjabi or shop signs in Punjabi. But all these places are interconnected. We can travel quickly and all. So in the past also, it most probably was like that. The only issue is that we have not done any archaeological research at all in the past 70, 80 years. Nothing at all. So we have found some random places here and there. But if we would invest in doing more archaeological excavations in the vicinity, you would find more such archaeological sites coming up. And eventually you'll be able to uncover the whole of ancient India, which would have been very vast.
Two questions. So, do you want to comment on Tamil older than Sanskrit, the Dravidian narrative?
So, the oldest literary evidence of Tamil is from the oldest Sangam literature, and that goes back to around 500 BCE. So that is the oldest evidence of Tamil that we have. Whether it was older than that or not, we cannot tell because we don't have evidence, but we clearly have evidence of Sanskrit that goes back way before that. So from the limited evidence that we have, one cannot agree that Tamil is older than Sanskrit. One would have to say that Sanskrit is much older than any other language that is known today in the world.
And maybe one final comment, we are running out of time, is on Tony Joseph's early Indians. Do you want to comment on it at all, and what are the flaws in it is the key question being asked, and your call whether you want to answer that.
Well, I have written an entire review article, so you could read that. See, the thing is that what he has done is basically he probably has been commissioned by somebody else, and that somebody else probably is David Reich, who has commissioned Tony Joseph to write a book that promotes his work also. That also promotes David Reich's work. And whatever is mentioned in that book is essentially nothing but a rehash of the old story of the Aryan Invasion Theory. And he has tried to portray the latest iteration of this theory, which is the multiple wave migration theory. So that's what he has tried to promote with a whole lot of supposedly scientific evidence and archaeological evidence and all that. But I have mentioned in the article, I mean, it's too long to specifically debunk right now, but basically it is all incorrect. It is all the evidence is incorrect because they have used incorrect logic and circular assumptions and lots of things like that to arrive at these conclusions.